Good morning, everybody, and welcome to you, Chief Constable, and to your team to our September meeting in public. And a warm welcome to anyone joining us online, and thank you for taking the time to join us and your interest in policing. I'm going to start, Chief Constable, with the recent disorder, and thank you for your written report to us, which covers the absolutely disgraceful disorder which took place on our streets in August. Those who engaged in this violence and disorder were intent on creating a climate of fear and to make people feeling unsafe and unwanted. Thankfully, due to the response from your officers, civic and political leadership, and the people of Northern Ireland, the violent street protests have now ceased. We look forward to discussing with you the police response to the targeted attacks that sadly continue. I was delighted to see the incredible turnout at the Belfast Mela this week and to get the opportunity to connect with people from so many global communities who have settled in Northern Ireland. And this is the Northern Ireland we all aspire to. The board offers our thanks to those officers and staff who worked around the clock during the disorder and wish all of those officers who were injured a well and full recovery. And we do hope to see them back in service very soon. We also record our sincere thanks to Police Scotland for providing PSNI with mutual aid and to those officers who travelled here to assist. Can I also take the opportunity this morning to encourage anyone who has any knowledge of criminal activity relating to this disorder to report what they know to the PSNI through the various channels open to you. If you feel unable to report to the PSNI, please remember you can report anonymously to Crime Stoppers. I'm moving on now, Chief, to resourcing. The serious concerns previously expressed by the board around resourcing levels for policing and the detrimental impact this has had on the capability and the capacity of the service were also brought into even sharper focus by the disorder I've just spoken of. At our last meeting, and indeed for much time now, the board has discussed and sought to highlight through these public meetings the serious financial situation the PSNI faces. Suffice to say, over the course of the last few weeks, the message on resourcing that seems to have flown under the radar has indeed come back to the fore. I note discussions in the media this morning of the programme for government made no mention of policing. This serves to underline how important it is that we continue to support you in the lobby for adequate funding, and we will absolutely continue to do so. As a board, we have supported the PSNI in the lobby for adequate funding, and we, as I've said, will continue to do so. Moving to the very disgraceful subject of violence against women and girls, Chief Constable, we have many times discussed the level of violence against women and girls across Northern Ireland. At our August session, we discussed the issues surrounding the tragic murder of Katie Simpson. Horrifically, in the course of just 1 week last month, 2 women were brutally murdered in the safety of their own homes. They join an ever-growing list of women and girls who have lost their lives, and we see growing levels of violence against women in this country. We've written to you, Chief Constable, and the Justice Minister on this issue, and we will be considering this matter further over coming meetings. We want to do all we can within our gift to ensure that the PSNI response to such tragic events and sadly increasing numbers of cases is not found wanting. And we want to ensure that the public have confidence in that response, so we will discuss this further with you over the coming weeks and the coming months. Can I welcome the work being done within the service to address concerns and to the review the violence against women and girls strategy? I attended a stakeholder event just yesterday on this subject, and it is clear that the service sees this as a big priority and is determined to get it right. Moving on, looking to the future, over the coming months, we will also be taking forward oversight of the implementation of the recommendations following the data breach last year. And at the October board meeting, we look forward to an update on the McCulloch review. And in November, we will be reviewing with you Operation Canova and the governance arrangements around that. Can I finish, Chief Constable, on a positive note, commending good service and place on record my admiration and appreciation for the good work done by very many officers across Northern Ireland. I have noted some already in my comments earlier, but I have also met with a number of areas and district commanders and have had the pleasure of attending a number of commendation events within the service. There's much good work going on across the service at all levels, and on behalf of the board, I do want to thank you and your staff for that. So, Chief Constable, could I now ask you for your opening comments?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your comments with regards to our officers and their incredible performance in the recent weeks. And as you've mentioned, much has happened since the last report to the board in August. We have witnessed appalling scenes of violence and disorder across Northern Ireland, with members of our ethnic minority communities and police officers viciously attacked, with criminal damage and arson to property being perpetrated by cowards often hiding behind keyboards, inciting hatred through social media posts. Those responsible will claim some misguided alignment to a false right-wing narrative, associating the deaths of 3 beautiful little girls in Southport with illegal migration. These people, as I've said before, will not even know the names of Alice, Bibi and Elsie Dot. The violence and intimidation subsequently suffered by our diverse communities here in Northern Ireland was a disgrace. Everyone needs to call this out. This is criminality, and this violence will not be tolerated. Since my appointment as Chief Constable last October, I've been meeting a number of leaders from our Muslim and diverse communities. This engagement came about as a result of previous racial attacks against these groups. The PSNI stands with our communities who were attacked. They add huge value to our society. They should hold their heads high, not bowed. It's very clear to me that many of those families have suffered years of abuse, and we need to use this disorder as a watershed moment in acknowledging and tackling racism. I've witnessed at first hand the fear and the despair these criminals during those nights of disorder brought to our Muslim and diverse communities. This will not be tolerated. There is no place for it, and we will police it as strongly as the law permits me to. As an organisation, we took a deliberately robust stance in dealing with the disorder, and that will continue. To date, including this morning, 3 arrests in Derry, Londonderry, we've made 48 arrests in total, charging 35 people to court. Some 300 hours of video evidence have now been examined. As part of our response, 19 images of suspects have been released to the media, leading to the identification of a number of suspects. I'd like to personally thank the public for their assistance in that regard. We will do everything in our power to bring people to justice for these hateful crimes. It was incredibly disheartening to see so many young people involved. We do not want to criminalise young people. That is the last thing any of us want to do, and I personally most certainly do not want to do. But serious racist assaults and assaults against the police, hate crimes and arson where people could have been killed or seriously injured will be dealt with as robustly as possible using all the resources available to the PSNI. Having witnessed a number of nights of disorder in Belfast, we then saw even younger people involved in disorder and serious violence in Derry, Londonderry, following the Apprentice Boys parades. That Saturday, I witnessed a super family-oriented day of parades and events that were disgracefully hijacked and marred by scenes of violence and disorder that this time did not target our Muslim communities, but targeted our police officers. Rioting is not acceptable anywhere in the United Kingdom, and I will be clear, that includes Northern Ireland. I will ensure the same strong response and arrest of those responsible occurs whenever this happens, including against those who incite it. I will be and need to be cautious with regards to prejudice about those cases now before the courts. However, we should all be concerned about images of adults directing children and encouraging them to riot. Charges have been brought for child neglect and child cruelty in that regard. I appealed then and do so now to parents and guardians of young people to take responsibility for the young people in your community when such events begin to emerge. Know where those children are. We have to decide what sort of society we want in Northern Ireland. The history of parades and tradition in Northern Ireland should be something that we celebrate. It should be a catalyst for bringing communities together, not separating them. It should be something that's celebrated worldwide. It should bring in enormous tourism. And these events are something that prevent all of that from happening. Most importantly, though, and in support of your comments, Chair, I must commend each and every officer and staff member for everything they did during this disorder, including repeatedly putting themselves in harm's way to keep our communities safe. The policing response from a public order perspective and the standing up of a thorough and relentless pursuit of those responsible was and remains world class. Put simply, in the face of this disorder, the men and women of the PSNI were outstanding. Notwithstanding the hugely difficult place we now find ourselves in from a resourcing perspective, which everybody, and I know everybody in this room, is alive to. There seems to be an underlying acceptance that public disorder in some quarters is allowed. This is not allowed. This violence is not allowed. We had some 40 police officers injured. I've spoken to each one of those injured officers, and they're all thankfully going to be okay. But some suffered concussion and others broken bones. We could have had some much more serious injuries, not just to my officers, but to members of the public, including children. I will be seeking sentences, the harshest sentences I can for those assaults. It is most noteworthy that during the recent disorder, a fantastic police service was maintained beyond the disorder, supporting victims and communities across Northern Ireland, responding to a brilliant feeler event. The Mela, which you mentioned, Chair, tens of thousands of people attended those events in safety with a fantastic public and community engagement approach from the PSNI. We've also continued as we've had to investigate murders, manage fatal road traffic accidents, allegations of child abuse, and many other issues within our communities that went beyond the disorder. I was delighted that the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State visited our Police College Carnival to meet injured officers and some of those ethnic minority community leaders affected by the disorder. They also found time to speak to our young student officers. It was incredibly heartening to listen to repeated tributes and accolades towards the PSNI from those community leaders. That should be recognised. It should be amplified. There was an overwhelming and recurring theme for support of the PSNI response from those communities to the disorder. They also each called for more resources for the PSNI. I've continually outlined the challenge of delivering policing resources in the face of a crippling funding position. This is not hyperbole. It's been an honest, professional assessment shaped by too many years of policing experience, and it's supported by repeated independent analysis. And I'm in the process of getting further evidence of the severity of our position. The PSNI can no longer stand up to the policing challenges we face without support from elsewhere. I had to mobilise the entire organisation and obtain mutual aid from the United Kingdom Policing with specialist public order support officers from Police Scotland. The Police Scotland officers were excellent and provided the resilience we needed. We couldn't have survived without them. We're indebted to our Scottish colleagues. Regarding the media reporting, following disclosure of a letter from the Permanent Secretary to me, I'll be brief on this and I'll make clear I will do everything I possibly can to secure a better funding settlement for the PSNI, because currently, as we all know, we're in a position we should not be in. and I disagree strongly with any rebuke about me approaching the Prime Minister. This is something I was entitled to do. I did not breach any protocol or any principle. The funding and effectiveness of the PSNI engages the interests and responsibilities of both the devolved and Westminster governments. I will communicate with both as I see fit, and I do not need authority or approval to do so. This unprecedented position that the PSNI is in as regards our resources and our budget absolutely demands that I do all I can as Chief Constable to find a way out of the mess that we're in with regards to our resourcing. And I want to assure you, the board, and everyone that my responsibilities as both Chief Constable and Accounting Officer are at the forefront of my decision making. Crucially, and to reassure the public, I'm also fully aware of the importance of my operational independence and my obligations as Chief Constable in relation to Section 32 of the Police Northern Ireland Act of 2000. To protect life and property, to preserve order, to prevent the commission of offences, and to take measures to bring offenders to justice, all of which we've seen in the recent weeks. In drawing a line under the issue, I'm delighted to announce that I and my team are working collectively and positively with the Minister, the Permanent Secretary and the Department of Justice, preparing a business case for the recovery of the PSNI police officer numbers. We must achieve 7,000 officers again as soon as we possibly can. That's going to take us some 3 years because of the condition that we're now in. This will still leave the PSNI 500 officers short of the 7,500 that every assessment suggests is the minimum that we should have. I am very clear that we should have 8,000 officers, and I'm supported by recent independent evaluations. I very much welcome and acknowledge the Minister and Permanent Secretary's support in drawing up this recovery plan, and we will do this together. I'm also delighted that the long-standing issue of an uplift of the revised environmental allowance for police staff has now been negotiated. And I know the board have been pivotal in supporting that, for which I'm very grateful. Police staff have received an interim payment in August. We're working with the department to conclude this matter in September. This week, I've spoken to the Minister and Permanent Secretary about this issue, and they share that endeavour. There has been an unacceptable delay in this since 2019. Finally, please, I want to thank the board for your support in recent weeks to my officers and to me with regards to ensuring that the lobbying that we're doing to get the proper funding for this organisation is listened to. It really is much appreciated. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Chief Constable, for that. And I will be moving on to questions. Just before we do, could I just again remind members, as I did in the private session, of the care that is needed around questions in order that they do not breach any sensitivity or ongoing proceedings. So just to note that. And first question comes from Vice Chair Brennan. It's on the racist hate crime.
Thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, I think we would all recognise that the police can't be expected to solve societal issues, but at the same time, they have a responsibility to prevent and tackle crime. And given the recent significant increase in racist hate crime that has now moved from street disorder to targeting individuals and property, what assurances can the Chief Constable provide with regard to the police response to these crimes? And how has the PSNI control strategy been enhanced to ensure that these racist thugs are held to account?
So firstly, thank you for the question, Brendan, because obviously it's very topical. I've spoken previously to the board about our strategic focus being to be victim focused and also to be communities focused. I mentioned in my introductory remarks that I've met a number of people from our diverse communities where previously, and this follows spotlight television programmes and letters that I received when I arrived about an unacceptable response to hate crime. I agree with you, these are societal issues. We can't actually arrest and police our way out of this. And the recent events that we've seen demonstrate what a challenge this is, not just here, but elsewhere across the United Kingdom. What struck me, and is relevant to your question, is when I met a number of community leaders and families during the midst of the disorder. Each of them explained that they'd suffered years of criminal damage, antisocial behaviour and racist abuse. And many of them had come to a position where they'd accepted it. They've accepted the unacceptable. We are prioritising hate crime. We had a discussion before at this forum, previous demonstrations of hatred and racism, where we had created a new specific operational response under Chief Superintendent Sue Steen. Our response will be that this is a priority for this organisation. I'm not going to talk about individual cases, but you will see in the media quite routinely examples of where people have been intimidated. We will go and see them. We will speak to them, and where we can collect evidence against those responsible, we will pursue them. I'm going to bring Bobby in because he's spoken about this earlier this week to demonstrate again how much of a priority this is for us. And again, in my remarks, I want to use this disorder as a watershed moment to deal with these issues that I think too many of us have either turned a blind eye to or not expressly come out to call out these activities. But let me bring in Bobby to talk about some of the things that we're doing from a tactical perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. And when we spoke last at the board, we obviously then subsequently had the events of the 3rd of August. But when we were here last, we were already highlighting the concerns that we had specifically around race hate crime. At that point, we'd seen a 7% increase. And as we've said earlier this week, our latest operational figures could point to the increase in race hate crime being as large as over a third. So that's massively concerning. It reinforces why this has to be a strategic priority for the organisation. You've touched on the control strategy, which again, we mentioned at the previous meeting. We've now finalised that. We have 3 key areas in which we intend to focus our efforts. The first is about making sure that we increase reporting through increased victim trust and confidence in policing. We have a range of measures under that in order to improve our outreach, our engagement, awareness, and to encourage reporting. One key strand of that as well that will be of interest to board members are the specific concerns that some communities have about the PSNI's role in terms of immigration enforcement. So we've recognised that as being a chilling factor in terms of people coming forward and speaking to the police, and we intend to finalise that work under that particular strand. The second element then is about improving the standards of service that we provide to victims of hate crime. We're starting in a good place with this in the sense that we already have assurance that we're providing a high level, in particular by comparison with the performance of other police services, and that's as a result of some internal audits that we've carried out. But we're never complacent in terms of the standard of service that we provide. And as the Chief has said, it'll be a priority for the organisation going forward to focus on providing the very best standards of service to all victims, but specifically under this piece of work, victims of hate crime and victims of race hate crime in particular. The third area then is about trying to improve hate crime outcomes. And I think it was Les that asked the question last month about how we improve that. And he recognised that as being crucial to giving people the confidence to come forward in the first place. So again, we're going to make that a particular area of focus. We are concerned about outcome rates for hate crime in general, but more specifically for race hate crime, where the outcomes can be as low as just over 10%. A big reason for that, it has to be said, and the Chief's touched on it, you have as well, Chair and Vice Chair, our biggest challenge is around fear. It's the fear that victims themselves have in terms of coming forward in the first place, by staying in fear of staying in the criminal justice process and seeing it through to its conclusion. But what we've also heard very clearly over the last month in our engagements with the wider community is also the fear that they have in terms of coming forward and providing information on those that they know are responsible for hate crime within their communities, because they then fear that they themselves will become a target for attack. That's why we took the opportunity earlier this week as well to work in partnership with Crime Stoppers to raise that function again. It's very important that people know that that facility exists, that allows them to provide information to the police anonymously that can make the difference in terms of us bringing people to justice. So those are the three broad areas where we're trying to improve our outcomes. We're happy to come back and brief the board in greater detail, potentially through the partnership committee in due course, to be able to provide further reassurance.
Chair, if I may, just a supplementary. Again, in terms of previous discussions, we've been made aware of the impact of the officer number cuts on the ability of the police to keep people safe. And I'm conscious that in terms of neighbourhood officers, the numbers have dropped from 900 officers to around 500 officers. And I'd be interested in your assessment in terms of how that cut in officer numbers at a neighbourhood level has undermined your capacity to actually address this issue.
I mean, I'll bring Bobby in again, but you know, and I do want to reference one thing again, Brenda. I mentioned it in my opening remarks. What I will say is that those community leaders, when they met the Prime Minister at Carnival, not provoked by me, or I didn't know what they would say, whether they would be complimentary or critical of the policing response. Each one, and this is my characterisation, sort of said the only people standing with us, standing in harm's way, were the police officers, the PSNI. Well, the less police officers we've got, the less we can do that. At the highest end of this and the disorder, even with the disorder, we tried to stand up a number of PSUs that we simply didn't have the officers to put in those PSUs. We're operating now at officers who can actually go out and do warranted duties, around about 4,500 police officers. 4,500. Now, those officers would go in our communities and they're part of the prevention of people taking the sort of decisions as young people to go in with gangs and commit this sort of abusive, racist, antisocial behaviour. They're our eyes and ears. They speak to people. They divert them from those pathways. That's what we should be doing. But even the officers we have in local neighbourhood policing, so many of them are abstracted for other duties because we have so many national responsibility events here, concerts. I talked about the Mila, I talked about the Fila. These events need considerable policing. So our officers aren't in those communities, they're not in those estates, they're not in those neighbourhoods. And often it's hard. I know our colleagues in health and education have challenges, and it can be quite dramatic how they can talk about consequences of not being funded. And they have been funded out of the money that's been available. They've been funded reasonably well, not as well as they'd like to be. We haven't, and the consequences are stark. But Bobby, I'll ask if you want to add anything else.
I echo what you said, Chief. And I mean, I think regrettably, we're in a situation where we're providing the best service that we can afford. We can provide a better service if we're properly resourced. Around the abstraction piece, I know the Chief himself is very worried that we are, if not already there, in a situation where we have neighbourhood policing, certainly for points of the year, really only in name only. But I would say to the community, though, that we will not leave them exposed. We will continue to protect them and keep them safe. I would continue to provide that reassurance. But in practical terms as well, we're constantly looking to understand what the impacts are of the resource and pressures that we're under. And some of the work that we've done very recently would demonstrate that, in particular around that community information, we seem to be in a situation now where, because of the loss, in particular of neighbourhood officers, that the amount of community information that's coming into this organisation could have as much as halved over time. And that is really stark. And that behind that community information every single time is a crime that's potentially not being solved, a person that's not being kept safe. So these are the very real impacts that we are experiencing already, but we'll continue to see unless action is taken.
Chair, just one addition, because it was pointed out to me. Since between 2019 and 2023, community intelligence reduced by 30% because of the lack of community engagement we had from our officers, 30%. We should be increasing that by 30%, not reducing it.
Yeah. Thank you. I have a supplementary from Linda on this subject.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the Chief Constable for your narrative at the outset around rape rate. And I think that this excuse of the 3 children who were killed in Southport needs to be taken out of the equation. It should never be mentioned again. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. The people who were out on the streets protesting and who are attacking people were doing it before that. And they do nothing, only harm children. They harm their own children by instilling hatred and racism into them. And they harm the children that they're terrorising, the children who are now afraid to go to school. And they have harmed a family in Uri, a child who was due to come home to join his mother, who now is not going to be there to join. And I think that we should offer our condolences to the family of Anu Akusanya. And I suppose on that basis, I want to ask the question, has there been any outreach done to that family? Because obviously Anu was attacked on 2 separate occasions prior to any deaths in Southport. And that is why I think we need to take that conversation out of the equation entirely. And it should be removed by the media. It has nothing to do with what is happening here. So just on that basis, has any outreach happened to that family? And then secondly, I mean, obviously neighbourhood teams and you know our position in relation to that, they are vital. They are absolutely vital. And in relation to the race hate crimes and what happened in August, the immediate thing that happened in my area is that the local neighbourhood teams reached out to us as elected representatives to ask, were there any issues or were we hearing anything on the ground? And that is so important. So we need that to continue. But we know we get the best results whenever we have the entire community involved in the solutions. So I suppose my question is also around that. What is happening in terms of that community engagement with the wider community as well? Because they have a responsibility to support those in their community who are vulnerable and who are being attacked at this time.
So I'll begin by just reassuring, yes, we have reached out to that family. I don't want to talk about specific cases. I know we tried to help the board at the last meeting around violence against women and girls, and because of a very topical programme, the Spotlight programme, we spoke at length about a particular case. That was quite unusual. I did it as an exception. With a number of these cases, we want to speak to the families before we speak in a public forum about those issues, but we have reached out to that family. But can I just pass you to Bobby again with regards to some of those community responses?
Yeah, I can reassure you, we very much have been taking that approach. We've been also working across the executive through the Community Safety Response Group to make sure that we're supporting our partners in education in particular, as well as in the Health and Social Care Trust, again, given the particular vulnerabilities for staff and health, but also then for young people returning to school was a major concern for a number of the community stakeholders that we've been engaging with. So we've continued to do that, not just at the strategic level, but again through the neighbourhood teams, as you've described. They've been reaching out to communities all across Northern Ireland, and will continue to do so going forward. And it's not just, as you say, the Black and minority ethnic communities. It's about making sure that the wider community understand the role that they can play in terms of standing with us on this. And I think Brendan hit upon it. It is definitely a whole societal issue, and we look forward now to working with the Executive Office to see how police can play their part in a whole societal approach to tackling this issue.
Thank you, Bobby and Linda. I have a supplementary from Peter Osborne on anti-immigration posters.
Thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, just on the issue of the rioting, I was in Belfast that day at the City Hall and different parts of Belfast and talking with Muslim friends and colleagues. And what I witnessed was a very, as good as it could be, police response, especially in the more dynamic situation later in the day. And I think anybody I spoke to acknowledged and recognised the policing that took place in the engagement with those communities. So can I commend the service for that? I want to ask a more specific question. I'm not going to name the village because I have had engagement with many people there over many years, and I suspect most of them would not want to be associated with the sentiments of a racist poster that went up and was taken down quite quickly. And I also want to acknowledge the cross-party support for the removal of that poster. But in many other cases, we don't see posters or graffiti removed quickly. In some cases, we hear anonymous statements from public agencies talking about consulting with communities before things are removed. In this case, recently, it was removed quickly. And when things are not removed or anonymized statements are made, that empowers the people who break the law, who put those posters up, because there are plenty of laws, whether roads order, cleaner neighbourhood, hate legislation, that can be used to remove these things. given what has happened recently and the welcome removal of that poster, can we expect to see other further more immediate removal of posters and graffiti that are racist in nature?
So firstly, Peter, I want to thank you for your comments about that first Saturday of disorder. I have to say, I was speaking to a number of community leaders that day, throughout that day, that evening, and on the Sunday, and we received huge and continuing accolades of thanks for keeping safe the Belfast Islamic Centre and constantly engaging with those communities. So it's good that you were there and that you're able to see that. I talked about this being a watershed moment. I think here, for society here, the recent disorder, you will appreciate, I think, from knowing me for a year almost now, I have a very strong view on these issues. And you will see, this is a priority for us. You will see, I think, an extension of my comments about this being a watershed moment by us taking more action. I think we have taken action in the past. There are all sorts of logistical challenges with this, because in the run-up to these recent events, I've been aware of posters that have been put up that it's too unsafe for us to get down. When I joined the job, we'd have got ladders out and got up and got them down, but we're not allowed to do that now because of health and safety, and we get told off for that. But working with partners, and I'm writing to partners currently to come up with a more robust response to when we see these sorts of hateful messages go up, so that everybody in Northern Ireland feels that it's a place to live of choice for all communities. And there is sufficient legislation, you're absolutely right, to deal with these issues. 3 or 4 different pieces of legislation that I just looked at last night that allow us to quite meaningfully deal with this. And where people are committing these offences, this is a societal offence. If they're living in these estates, if they're getting housing assistance, we should be asking questions about that. If they're not contributing positively to society, then it shouldn't just be a criminal issue, it should be a societal issue. So you will see a more positive response. I am conscious of freedom of speech issues, which are often rightfully put in front of me. But where things reach a threshold of engaging criminal offences, we should deal with them quickly and send a very clear message about these issues. And that's something we've had conversations about as a senior team and an organisation, but we need to support partners as well in that. Bobby.
Yeah, again, just, obviously placing racist posters and graffiti on public property is unlawful. And it's likely to engage a number of offences. It could be intimidation, could be offences under Article 9 of the Public Order, Northern Ireland Order, could also be provocative conduct. We talked a bit about our statutory responsibilities earlier. Where offences are suspected, we do have a positive obligation to intervene and investigate crime. And in these circumstances, we also have to take steps to have offended material removed. And in terms of what those steps are, we retain the operational discretion as to what that will be. In certain instances where we can, we have removed material. So you've alluded to one example. There were a number of other instances earlier this year where posters have been removed by police where it was safe for them to be able to do so. In other cases where material in particular is at height or on property belonging to other public agencies, we will always look to engage with them to have them remove that material. I'll be honest with you, Peter, I think collectively we could do that quicker. And there are several instances as well, and it should be recognised, where communities have taken the initiative themselves because they're not supportive of the sentiment that's being expressed in this material, and they've seen it removed themselves. So we effectively approach every single instance through the same kind of decision-making framework, but ultimately we have to take each case on its own merits. As the Chief says, in less clear-cut cases where freedom of speech issues are engaged, we take legal advice on it, and we look to find the most appropriate policing outcome. But the bottom line is this: where these things happen, the police have an obligation to take action of some description, and we will.
Well, briefly, Chair, I very much welcome the responses, and I do sense a change of approach over now compared to a number of years ago. I just want to reinforce the point, leaving these things up when they're unlawfully put up, whether graffiti or posters, legitimizes and empowers the people who put them up. And I acknowledge the fact that there are other agencies involved and other issues around who's responsible. But what should drive us is not legitimizing the sentiment or the people who put these things up. And what I do understand there may be health and safety issues. In my view, there are greater health and safety issues of those who are the victims of these posters and graffitis going up.
I agree with everything you just said.
Thank you. And before I go on to the next question, which is a different subject, could I just add our condemnation, as you have done it once again, for the attacks that are ongoing, and hope that your police service will address those. And it is a wider societal issue, and that partnership that you're embarking upon with other agencies, because you're picking up the pieces after the problems have happened. The next question, I'm going to go back to Peter. You have a question on funding.
Thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, you've touched on this and answered the question in some ways, but I do want to come back to you referenced the letters that were in the media a week or two ago. There were interesting exchanges, and of course, accounting officers in different organisations have different responsibilities and represent different people and organisations in different ways. I think what was clear out of those letters, for me, I suppose, was that everybody who was party to the letters and the responses to the letters agreed that there was a need for more resourcing. And I suppose everybody also accepted that that resourcing should be sustainable and not a one-off response from wherever that would come from. And I also think there probably was an acknowledgement, don't want to speak for anybody in that, but I just read into it an acknowledgement around the need for recovery, as you said, and increased policing numbers. You've touched in your comments and in the written material to the board of that plan and the need to put together a response for the Northern Ireland Executive to consider. Can I ask you where that response is, when the Executive may receive that sort of response, but from yourselves and others? Is it as ambitious, or will it be as ambitious as you would want it to be? And will it lead to the sort of recovery in what we've just heard, neighbourhood policing numbers that we would want and expect? And finally, I suppose, will it be, and we've touched on this many times, a plan that is multi-annual, looking many years in advance about what the needs of policing are?
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for the question, and again for yours and the board's support in this particular space. So, the chair mentioned earlier about the programme for government that we're waiting to hear the details of, the draft programme for government. I would very much be concerned if the PSNI and our current position around funding and resourcing is not front and centre of the programme for government. And I will be waiting to see what that looks like keenly, hopefully today, but whenever that draft programme is produced. We have an interesting time frame now because we have the October monitoring round, whereby some funding will be released in October, where different parts of the public sector might not be able to spend money. There's also some additional money released in year. And I would expect we have a £34 million gap. I have very little I can do about that gap. That's our people. The only thing I could do is, as my predecessor has been forced to do, is go down lower in numbers. I will not be doing that. It's not safe for you to live in Northern Ireland if I do that. And that's why I talk about my Section 32 responsibilities. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the programme for government. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the October monitoring. With regards to the draft business case that we are writing for the recovery plan, that is going to take us from April next year, 2025, over 3 years. It will mean that we recruit those that we lose through natural wastage, which in police officer numbers is around about 350 officers a year. But additionally, over those 3 years, it will provide us with 700 more officers to take us back to 7,000. You asked if that is ambitious enough. No, it's not. But we can only expect to get so much money because of what's available. So I'm trying to be realistic and fair to everybody, even though I don't think people have been very fair to the PS9 funding in recent years. I would suggest to you that we have a policing plan, and we're having discussions at the moment, for the next 5 years from 2025. The first 3 years of that policing plan, which will be a plan agreed between the board and the PSNI, should include that recovery plan for 3 years. But then the 2 years thereafter, what numbers should policing be at? And with the draft business case, we are, I will say this, and I really welcome it. I'm extremely pleased. We are getting support around this proposal from the Minister and the Permanent Secretary. And I'm delighted to say that. We are also, though, going to make sure that that plan, and I had Sir Andy Cook, the Chief HMI, here last week for Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabularies and Fire and Rescue. I had Sir Andy Marsh here, who heads the College of Policing, and I'm speaking to the head of National Police Chiefs Council, Gavin Stevens, who all now understand the acute position of the PS9, which they didn't quite realise. They will also be casting an eye over our business case to kite mark, if you will, the severity of the position that the PS9 is in, which is an outlier for policing in the United Kingdom. So I'm doing everything I can. Pamela is leading on the business case. I would hope, it's currently over 100 pages. I would hope that business case certainly will be something that we could start to circulate and socialise, and with this board in the not too distant future, but I'll bring Pamela in. But key points for me are the programme for government. What is our programme for government? Where do the PSNI sit on that? And I will be selfish, the PSNI I'm talking about, and be interested to see what happens in the October monitoring round as to what funds are available, what we see to the PSNI. But it's not going to happen overnight. We can only recruit so many people a year. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a sort of an understanding of where we currently are in the planning. But let me hand over to Pamela.
Peter, I'll just add possibly a little bit to that. I suppose in your position, Chief has made reference to the October monitoring round, so still a residual gap of 34 million, and of course that includes a provision for pay award for both officers and staff. So crucial really for us as part of October monitoring to try and secure that. I think helpfully the recovery business case that we're working on is a 3-year view. Part of that is resource bound. The honesty also is part of it is our ability to actually, and that's on average 500 officers a year. PSNI has never recruited more than that. So there's a capacity issue, particularly with the college and us doing that. We're engaged with the Department of Justice at the moment around a 3-year budget planning exercise. So again, back to your point of not a single year focus. And I think that's very helpful. And it's completely in line with us looking at the 3-year business case around the recovery position for headcount. So I think the fact that those two are quite aligned, it anchors into programme for government, and to an extent is the first 3 years of the 5-year policing plan, all starts for me from a strategic point of view and a strategic planning exercise, aligns pretty well. So I'm hopeful that it'll all come together.
Thank you. And there's a supplementary from Mark Durkin on this subject.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the Chief for his answers today. Just to put on record my disagreement, or I share your disagreement on the rebuke that you received for your approach to the Prime Minister. Now, you've identified there a couple of possible opportunities to plug the gap, namely the monitoring round and the promotion of policing as a priority in the programme for government. But last month, you had indicated to us in your accountability report that you might seek, or that you may seek, the endorsement of the board of a budget with unresolved budget gaps. The outlook on this month's accountability report is even more bleak, and while there's potential to plug that gap, at least in part, coming up, are you still in a position that you will or may seek the board's approval of a budget with those unresolved budget gaps?
Yes, we are. And of course, the disorder cost, I think in the region of £3.5 million. That gap only gets worse. I don't see any opportunities to reduce it, although believe me, and I've read a very voluminous binder probably 3 times now of my accounting officer responsibilities. I think I'm going to have to quote it soon and become a subject matter expert. Wherever we can find cuts, we will. But this has been done 2 or 3 years now because of the way we've been funded. So where else do I go? I welcome any thoughts from anybody. I mean, I'll make it known now when I've spoken to a lot of those people involved. I think our close protection unit, our budget, those people are protected, is an area we need to look at and modernise and revise. And that includes my position on that. I think we need to look at what we can do there. There are some opportunities in legacy, but a lot of these can't be realised until into next year. And if they are realised, they are not anywhere near the amounts that we need. But my duty around my responsibility around the public purse is honestly at the forefront of my mind. But no, we will have nothing but an option to present you with a gap with regards to our position.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, that's likely to come through in the remaining part of September for you to consider that. And by no means as an excuse at all. Certainly, as for part of the business case, we've been looking at the in-year funding that we've been getting over the past number of years. And when you're getting £100 million a year as in-year monitoring, you don't get that in April. It's extremely challenging. So I'm by no means saying that we shouldn't and have done more. But I think in the context of the residual gap for the block, which I think is sitting at over 600 million, our 34 is pretty tight. Particularly in line with our budgetary position, but I do think that's something that is a decision for yourselves this month.
Great, thank you. Next question from Trevor Clark on the LGBT network.
Which question of mine first? I had many in there.
Okay, murder of Katie Simpson.
Yeah, I put that up and I recognise the time. Yeah, I just wanted to touch base on some of the comments that were made regarding the Katie Simpson murder investigation at the last board meeting. But before I go on to say that, I just do want to highlight that last week I attended a meeting with Davy Beck regarding the other cases that have been brought to the attention. And I will say that there are family members who are very happy that the PSNI are initiating reviews, and that the conversations that we had with Davy have been very productive, and there is confidence in that moving forward. I think it was important to note that today. But back to the comments that were made last month, and I recognise that you said that you don't normally comment on individual cases, but where it will remain a matter of public interest, I will and have said to continue to ask questions around the Katie Simpson investigation. There was a comment made regarding the investigatory mindset of police officers at the time of the incident and following Katie's death, which has caused quite a lot of concern and upset within the policing community, because there were a number of officers who, from the incident on day one, raised concerns and red flags. Indeed, there are officers and a constable in particular who should be commended for her work that was taken in the investigation. And I just want to ask perhaps if you could reflect on those remarks to highlight that there were people within the police service, in particular constables and sergeants, who did actually from day one see it as an investigation.
So I have said, Nuala, I'll be very clear. I'll underscore this and underscore it again. I'm not going to talk in detail about the Katie Simpson case with you in this forum. I'm going to speak to the family about it, who I've met and spoke to as recently as the weekend, and they're still waiting for the Ombudsman report to see what the Ombudsman's findings were for them. And I'm going to go back and see them about that. That's my investment in this area around violence against women and girls. What I said at the last board meeting, and I watch every board meeting over again because I don't have much of a life, is that I acknowledge that some officers have done a good job. In fact, one of the officers, Detective Sergeant particularly, had pursued the issues to the point of, I think, being a key reason that the major investigation team and Superintendent then Murphy triggered a full investigation. Also, I know, and I can't talk about it, Chris reminds me, the Ombudsman gave us their findings around 3 officers for misconduct issues, of which 2 were found and 1 was not, which again, we can't actually legally talk about. I always support and acknowledge what our officers do. And I know the individual officer you're talking about who has been spoke of positively. I talked about the organisational mindset where we weren't professionally curious enough around this. And it's not just this case, because the accolades you just gave to Davy, that's the family that I saw. And I know, and I don't want to talk about that with you or in this forum, until the due process has happened. Let the Ombudsman report where the criticisms that there are of the PSNI, which there is no defensiveness here. There isn't. We will look at those criticisms and we'll do everything we can to learn. At the last board meeting, I think Davy spoke for 12 minutes about the things we're doing. I was delighted that the chair of the board went to the IAG meeting yesterday around the first 2 years of our policy around violence against women and girls and what we're doing between years 3 and 7. I'm having reviewed a number of cases that, go back a number of years, not, sort of to COVID period, where you've raised concerns and we've done quite a lot of work to look at those cases, which there is a comprehensive crime review happening on those to do any lessons learned. But in those cases, if there are lessons to be learned, and I want to make this very clear, it's not the individual officers that I have a criticism with. It's our organisational approach and our societal approach, again, to people who commit these crimes. We will, of course, and I do have to acknowledge, go through the due process of the Ombudsman's examination of these cases. And the Ombudsman have had some findings that we've had to address. When the time is right, which is not now, we'll deal with those when the information is all on the table. And that is as far as I will go now, because I've made an absolute commitment to Katie's family that the first people I'll speak to about these issues, because it's right to do it that way, will be them. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think I'm happy to come back to this at a later date and just to reflect that I'm not criticising only the PSNI, but there were failings in the Pony investigation too. And that will also come out with time because I think it's important that all of the due process that was followed, both by myself and others from day one, that all of the information does come to light so that there is true accountability. But I respect that you have committed to speaking to the family first.
Thank you. Mark, you have a supplementary on this question?
Thanks, Chair. Again, suppose like associated with those remarks there. This case looked awful, and the more we learn, the worse it looks. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point there's talk of a public inquiry into this, and I appreciate you can't go into detail on this, Chief Constable, but if you could just answer maybe what should happen in circumstances where there is a degree of professional curiosity that's now been acknowledged. There are reports from members of the public from both ends of Northern Ireland, essentially, as well as reports of someone acting unusually or abnormally in the hospital setting. What should happen in circumstances like that?
So, Mark, again, I know you really want to talk about this, and I've been in policing for over 40 years. Scrutiny like this happens when, and there could even be an inquest on this. And I don't know if this is me educating the board or the board educating me. But there's very little I can say about it. It should happen that those injuries to Katie should have been identified earlier. The events that we then saw happen after the 18th of December when there was a meeting would have unfolded in the August, and that didn't happen. And I'm not blaming individual officers on that. That's a corporate responsibility to get things right. But there's a reality here that, I've been involved in dealing with domestic abuse and cases which are heartbreaking since I joined policing. And you know what? Long after I finished and you're not on the board, there'll be heartbreaking situations around domestic violence and coercive and controlling behaviour. Again, there's some societal elements to this. All I can do is make sure where there is learning for the PS9 that we apply it. And Davey spoke at length around the various processes and systems that are being put in place around ownership of these cases, early identification of concerns that are properly escalated to supervising officers where there's an accountability to make sure that things are done. All of that is in place. And we're very keen to demonstrate to Katie's family what we've done to learn the lessons from that. But the detail of that, over and above what I've said, and I've tried to be helpful with your question, I think I've got to wait until the Ombudsman have reported and Katie's family's response to that. And I will then go and see them and go through any questions they've got about individual officers or issues that are highlighted in that report. That will then, I've got no doubt, result in a board meeting where we will discuss those issues. And rightfully, you will hold me to account for the failings of the organisation in that particular case.
Thank you. Just another supplementary from Trevor.
It's probably not more supplementary other than a comment to acknowledge, like Nuala, David Beck has reached out to me also to pass on what's going to happen in relation to the family that I had raised last week, and as did you, Chief. You have actually rang me since that to acknowledge the fact that you are going to follow that up with the meeting. So I look forward to David's going to, obviously, if he hasn't already done so, give that in writing. But I acknowledge the comprehensive, and you've referenced it, the comprehensive response that David gave us last month. And I do appreciate that David has reached out and I passed that on to the family. So there's just more a comment.
Thank you. Next question is from Nuala on the LGBT network within the PSNI.
Thank you, Chair. I have a comment to read from someone who usually kind of stays quiet within the PSNI and in terms of engagement, that is from the LGBT sector, in which they have said that the PSNI have continuously failed to support the LGBT plus staff, which has created a negative culture, which has now recently progressed to hostility. I think following the leak of the email, and we can all think what we want regarding the email, but the leak of that and the issues that surrounded that following has created a lot of hostility for the LGBT team within the PSNI. I also wanted to put on record that these study sessions, these mentor groups, we all know they happen right across Northern Ireland. We know they happen for women specifically. We know that they happen for ethnic minorities. We know that they happen whenever higher ranking officers do it for people within their own district and their own team. And I think that this is such a sad response to receive from HR regarding the issue to all of the network. I understand there was an email that was sent out that rather than just drawing a line under that issue, it has created yet more negativity for the LGBT network, who took the decision themselves not to offer it because of the overwhelming pressure that was placed upon them. And what exactly is the PSNI now going to do to ensure that those who are minority are actually represented in the PSNI? Who's going to want to join the PSNI now when you come from an LGBT section of the community? I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done regarding confidence from that network of people. And I have reached out, and people have reached out to me over the past 2 weeks, and there is a lot of anger and upset and personal hurt.
Okay, I'm not sure there was a question there, but so firstly, the email that went out, the intention was really noble. There's no doubt about that in my view. And it has caused, again, I talked previously about the PSNI as a lightning rod for society here. It is a lightning rod for society. I would say, and the senior team here, we all meet, and this doesn't happen with forces across the UK, all of our minority support groups, individually and collectively. And I don't recognise your comments, Nuala, I really don't, around, there may be individual cases, I get that, we're a big organisation where people feel less supported, but the leads of those various support groups, the heads of those various support groups, I think we have a really positive relationship with them. There may be individuals, maybe texting you now, who aren't very happy, but the actual support group leads we've got good relationships with. I know this has caused a big stir publicly. I want the PSNI to be an employer of choice. So whatever diverse group may exist in society, the policing that we have should represent every group, every emerging community, every protected characteristics that we have in society, we should have within the organisation, and they should feel confident and supported. I know the statistics because I've seen it particularly with regards to race issues, where there are concerns about the representation in policing at a senior level, at senior management level, at chief officer level of those diverse groups. And I think the intention was simply to provide some support within that group. That was the intention. As I've said, the response has been very polarised. The email was not sanctioned or supported or known to the senior team of the PSNI. What I will say is the first question I asked is about the gateway to emails of who can share emails, because I think it could have been framed in a different way that wouldn't have caused, because it has actually caused harm to the sort of work that we're trying to do with our support networks. So we've even had officers apparently reporting injuries on duty because they're not allowed to have support for promotion processes. I'm advocating Team PSNI. That's one of the things I've said since I began working here as Chief Constable. Nobody is more important than anybody else. And everybody, whatever role you have in the organisation, if you don't do your role as we need you to do it, it affects the entire organisation. And there's no clubs, there's no place for any discrimination. I mean, this board meeting today, I think, has described the impacts of any sort of discrimination that can lead to. We will continue to support those networks. We will make sure that anybody who wants to take the promotion, whether it's a sergeant or any other role, there's an equality of arms around support for that. We've all done promotion. We've all joined different study networks to do that, whether within inclusive groups or not. So I just want to reassure you, Nuala, that, you know, everybody around this table are huge advocates for our minority groups and diversity in policing. I have been in organisations where that's not been the case, and it's concerned me. Some of that will be due to my time in policing, but that's not the case here. It really isn't. And I'm very conscious of talking about the business case to link this that we're doing for the 3-year programme of recovery. I want that to include recruitment of people from everyone in society here. And we need all of our minority groups to help us with that, and people in the policing board to help us with that. We're looking at the gateways for how these emails go out. We are providing support to the people involved in providing the email. We are also messaging to say, look, everybody will get support from supervisors. There's an equality of arms around the promotion processes. I think it's a story that's blown entirely out of proportion as well. I will say that, entirely out of proportion. But I'm not blind to any individual sense of, feeling injured from people. But with that, and I think we need to start to get some perspective around it, I'll just hand over to Bobby and perhaps Claire around any comments around the emails that the organisation has sent out. Or anybody else who wants to make any comment about this, because all I've seen since I've been here is a strength around supporting our diverse communities, not a weakness around it. Start with Bobby.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I've been aware of the network for more or less since it was established, and they've always prided themselves on being an inclusive body. It's the fact that anyone can apply to join the network, either as a full member or as an ally. I think the chief's right. I think this came from a position where they were trying to provide support to their members, which is something that in a recent kind of survey that they'd run with their membership that they'd specifically been asked to do. I think their concern and the reason for the application of any criteria was really about their ability to meet the demand that they were facing more than anything else. So I think regrettably the email and the criteria unfortunately ended up being exclusionary, which, as I say, doesn't really reflect who they are as a network. I don't know if Claire wants to add anything else, but I would also just say the chief and I recently met with the network, a number of representatives from it. So the sentiment that you've expressed, they certainly did express to us in that meeting. And I know the chief was very keen to look at practical things that we could do in partnership with the network going forward to try and address that feeling that they have around the level of organisational support and the concern that they feel as individuals within the organisation as well. So they had that face-to-face with myself and the chief, and we've committed to do some work with them specifically on that.
Thank you. I mean, I echo comments from the chief and Bobby. I think it's important that, you know, I'm clear and state that we are absolutely committed to creating a workplace environment that is inclusive. It is clearly stated by us as a team, and you know, in our people strategy, and indeed, you know, even in our intentions and priorities from the cultural audit that over 4,000 of our workforce responded to last year. So creating an inclusive working environment is and remains one of our priorities. And that includes ensuring that there is equality of opportunity for all groups and all identities within our workforce in relation to access to training and learning and promotion processes. And it does mean that if any of those groups face barriers, we will take positive action to support removing those barriers, and we'll do that, you know, collectively and in consultation with them. And I think as well, just to add to what Bobby has said, we have a range of minority and diversity staff associations, as you know. They are really valuable to us, and our partnership working with them is critically important. We value their contribution to our equality, diversity, inclusion agenda. And, you know, I agree that I think regrettably that, you know, this matter has, you know, been taken out of context. And we support all of those officers who are trying to develop, and the hard work that it takes for them to develop and revise for exams such as this when there are promotion processes, and we encourage them to seek support, and we will be there to support as well.
Nuala, I was just going to say, obviously, it might be that people don't want to speak to me. Normally they do. You know my approach to this. I'm very happy to have a coffee with anybody that's, you know, speaking to you that wants to express concerns, and anything we can do to help recover that.
My supplementary will be in the private session.
Thank you. Water. Your supplementary, Trevor, yes.
I probably take a slightly different approach, as you would expect. I've probably had an unprecedented number of officers right across Northern Ireland contacting me with a different view on this. They actually believe that they've been left out and marginalised because of the discriminatory nature of how this original request was framed. And whilst I appreciate each of these minority groups need to have representation, I do still question, and I don't think you've given enough weight onto it, Chief, about how this email went for general population and how someone has access to all of that. Lots of officers have expressed concern about that part, and about this group then having an exclusive club on offer to allow people with a promotional opportunity. Lots of those officers out there who don't belong to any of the minority groups, who probably may fit into some of those, been left out of this scenario. Many people, and I meet officers regularly, even my own constituency and other areas, who have went through the process and have been unsuccessful. And I suppose they're wondering today, should they have joined an LGBT group or another group to actually coach them to get through the process? So I think there's an awful lot more to this. The other thing I want to bring it up now too, Chair. I listened to our chief, listening to the Nolan show this morning on the way in here. There was conversation around the Equality Commission, whether you contacted them or they contacted you. And if we can clear that up, whether this was driven, the response from the PSNI was driven by the Equality Commission contacting you directly, or as an organisation, or you contacting the Equality Commission, given the discriminatory nature of the original request.
So let me go first. I don't know the Equality Commission, so I'll look to my left or right on that. Listen, I spoke to the Federation about this. I've been in policing for over 40 years. A lot of the people who are contacting you will be contacting you because there's a culture in policing that why are all these clubs? I'm not in a club. When I joined the organisation, there are 80 of us. We're all men, 79 white guys and 1 black guy. And let's put this in perspective now. We need to support groups who sometimes feel that they're excluded. And that's why I understand the intent of the email. There is a realism that needs to come here that most of those police officers, I think, who are contacting you, and I'll stand by this, and I'm happy to meet them, are doing it because it's almost like a cultural response to the email that they think, oh, here we go again. You know, it's the yoke policing. We're not yoke. We're the police. We showed that when we had the disorder in recent weeks. We do need to make sure people who feel marginalised and not supported do not feel marginalised and not supported, that we look after them. The mainstream of officers who take the exams, whether it's sergeants all the way up to even doing boards like this, there are various things accessible to them that you don't have in health or education. We provide it all for free. So I think there is some, I think this is now day 3 on the Nolan show. There is something that just needs to put a bit of perspective on this. Anybody who wants any support for promotion, supervisors will provide it. This offer now, and I'm not even sure of the reasons for it, but is now not happening as I understand it. I wouldn't expect this sort of response to this really anywhere else in the United Kingdom, I have to tell you, and I'll always be honest with you all about this. So can we get back to policing? I don't know about the Equality Commission, forgive me, but I'm sure Claire does.
Yeah, so I can confirm that I understand the Equality Commission were contacted by other parties. As a result, they obviously have statutory duties. You'll know the Equality Commission for Northern Ireland have statutory duties to ensure that organisations, PSNI being one of them, are fulfilling their statutory obligations. So they contacted us, and I have spoken directly with their Director of Advice and Compliance. Their concern was that PSNI were endorsing or carrying out training exclusively for particular groups, without it having been considered against the criteria which are set in regulations and guidance about when positive action should be taken and how that should be assessed. So their inquiry was one of a point of clarification in the first instance around the position and the inquiries that they had. And also they were there to offer advice to us on this matter and going forward. It was a very constructive conversation and very helpful, and they are satisfied with their understanding now and the facts that we've provided them around where the email came from, what PSNI's position is, and how we're responding to it. And I'm grateful to colleagues in the Equality Commission for their ongoing offer of advice and support. Should in the future we believe that we do need to take any positive action to address barriers to opportunity or underrepresentation, and they will be there to support us as we consider and assess those.
Can I just bring in Chris, because the first question I asked was about how does everybody get access to all the people in the organisation through our internet? So I've asked Chris to look at that. So just to complete the answer to your question.
Just on that aspect, Trevor, so there's a very practical reason why certain officers and members of staff have to be able to contact the whole of the organisation. You can imagine we're a 24/7 service. At 3 o'clock in the morning, there's sometimes reasons to send out circulations to the whole of the organisation. So we have to make sure that is available to people who are on duty that time of day, etc. Having said that, we have some rules around that, and what we've done, you'll be aware that we established the data board as recently. The board was heavily involved in that as a result of other issues we've dealt with in the past. But that's given me the opportunity to have a look at this with a group of specialists. We sat on Monday, coincidentally, we looked at this particular issue. I've tasked the group to have a look at the policy around this. The technical solution is very easy. We can limit access to whoever we want to limit access to, but we need to make sure that we do have the means of using the network to communicate effectively when we can, and when we are clear about who should and shouldn't do that. We need to make sure they've got the support, that they've got the awareness. As this issue highlights, language is very important. We need to make sure that when someone is pressing the button and circulating the communication service wide, that they're doing that with some thought before they press that button.
I appreciate your comments, Chris, but is it not already the case that it is limited? And if it is limited, the person who did hit the button, were they authorised to do so?
They were authorised to do it, but we will look at the reasons why they were authorised and who should be authorised in the future.
Thank you. We're running short of time and I have a few more questions, and I would encourage members to keep their questions short and responses short as well. Next question is from Cheryl on attacks on places of worship.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Chief Constable for your answer so far. You have touched on this slightly at the start of the meeting, but I just wanted an update basically on the increase in attacks of places of worship. Obviously, there has been a devastating attack on the Green Island Parish Church within my constituency. So it's just to ask the PSNI, what actions are they taking to protect vulnerable religious communities and prevent these targeted acts of vandalism and arson going forward?
Yeah, of course. And I actually spoke to one of the parishioners on the committee at the church about the attack at the church in Green Island, because that was on the evening of they'd had a 70th anniversary, I think it was. His personal circumstances, that church is extremely important to him. And obviously I know it's had a huge impact. I will come to Bobby on that particular incident, although it's an ongoing investigation. But we also, as you know, saw an attack on a mosque in Newton Ards during the recent disturbances. And I visited the mosque and went to see the mosque leaders there around that. Listen, this all sort of lends itself into potentially some of the things we've seen about discrimination and hatred. A lot of it goes, I think, I want more officers in schools. I want more officers speaking to, the church here. Faith is so important. I want more officers engaged with our faith leaders. Only recently, I spoke to Father Martin McGill about going to a number of events of cross-church leaders to speak to them about their concerns. Some of those concerns are about security. Okay, I know that. So we are listening. Again, what I will say with regards to the attack on the Newton Ards mosque, there have been arrests, and the elders at the mosque are extremely pleased with the response of the PSNI. I'll come to Bobby around the Green Island Church and anything else he wants to say about that. But it's something that, believe me, if you have any examples where there are concerns from individuals, we'll speak to them. I'll make sure that's done. And I'm hoping it's not a trend, but we are aware that there have been a few, and whether this is antisocial behaviour, that kids being kids, and let's face it, we get that happening. We were all kids. I was a nightmare. But what we don't want that to transition is into the sort of things we then saw at Newton Ards. But if we get that neighbourhood policing footprint right, that would be the biggest antidote to this. Bobby?
Yeah, thanks, Chief. So on Green Island, some encouraging signs there. We have strong and promising lines of inquiry. So we expect to see some investigative action in that in the near future. You'll be aware that wasn't being treated as being racially motivated. There's, however, an attack on a religious premises. Places of worship and other symbolic premises will be a key strand again of the revised hate crime control strategy. Again, regrettably, it's a feature of what we see here in our community at times, intolerance. So we'll continue to have a specific focus on that through the control strategy, and we work with a range of partners, not just faith groups, but also loyal orders and things like that as well, specifically on this issue.
It's okay. Sorry, just to comment really quickly, I really appreciate that. I was there with the church and it was absolutely devastating to see the impact that had, particularly because it was their 70th anniversary and the celebrations and everything that they had from all them years. So it was heartbreaking to see that. In terms of collaboration, I understand to move this forward, we need to work with a range of different agencies, both statutory and community. But in terms of the likes of the Northern Ireland Fire Service, is there work ongoing there, particularly in terms of education for younger people in terms of the effects of arson and the education around that?
So they're clearly one of our key statutory partners. Obviously through police and community safety partnerships in particular, there are opportunities there, and that's been identified as a key element going forward for the control strategies.
Super, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next question is from Alan Chambers regarding issues in public spaces specific to Bangor, I believe.
Sorry, there's been much local social media commentary recently, a lot of it been posted anonymously about suspicious characters lurking in parks and public spaces in Bangor, causing fear and distress to females and children using the areas. Can the police confirm if they are actually receiving any reports from the public regarding these alleged incidents? And if so, what actions are you taking to allay public concerns?
I will bring Bobby in. I think this is a sort of question that maybe we can give you a written answer to because of the strategic nature of the board. I don't think there's a pattern on this, Alan, from when I asked the questions when I was aware that there may be a question about Bangor. I'll bring Bobby in, but I think we can probably give you a more fulsome written response if that's okay with you. But Bobby?
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Thanks, Alan. There were a handful of cases earlier in the year, but we've not seen, as the Chief says, reporting that would demonstrate a trend or a hotspot location in connection with this. So I suppose, in light of the concerns that you're raising here today, I would simply make the appeal to people that if they are concerned about these issues, that they do make sure that they report them to police, whether that's through conversations with the local neighbourhood policing officers or by using the 101 system, or in the case of an emergency, 999.
I don't believe that a lot of these postings are done in the public interest. And as an elected representative, I haven't received any complaints about these incidents, and a lot of them are linked to ethnic background. And, you know, you sense that maybe there's a bit of mischief making going on. But I think the message that the Chief Constable would agree that if people have concerns, it's not that don't go to social media. Contact the police. You can't respond. There's been a lot of criticism of the police through these threads. You can't respond if you don't know about them. So I think that's the clear message.
Yeah, Alan, thank you for that. No, I really would echo that. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter McReynolds' question on the use of body worn video.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, in a recent written response to me, one of your chief inspectors told me that PSNI officers use body-worn cameras under their own discretion, but it's been alleged to me that at times officers haven't used them in the various circumstances listed in that response, in which they may be expected to, and cases where captured footage could have been useful in future legal capacity. So today I'd like to know, do you think the officer discretion clause is effective and robust? How do you ensure all body-worn footage is utilised as it should be? And what happens when officers don't use it appropriately?
So I think we can give you a further written answer on this, Peter, but in effect, we follow the National Police Chiefs Council policy with regards to the discretion clause, if I can call it that. But there are mandatory times that body worn should be switched on. So things like stop and search, use of spit and bite guards, etc. And I will bring Ryan Henderson on this. What I am alive to, and I know I keep revisiting this, is the cameras we have are at end of life, so we need new cameras, and that's another pressure on our capital budget. We have 3,500 units. I think in 26% of calls, just over a quarter of all calls, body worn camera is engaged. And in well over 90% of domestic incidents, it's engaged. And there is a scrutiny process through our service accountability panel that dip samples the use of body worn. I reference this. There are different. So this is progress in policing because of accountability on all sides. It's led to police complaints coming down, and there's an example in Northern Ireland I was aware of recently where a lady was subject to a terrible incident in a car where sadly she died because of fire, but gave officers an account of what had happened. On the body worn, it was quite clear from the medical staff that this was going to be, she needs to be sedated and she may not survive. There are so many instances where it's incredibly valuable. What again I would say to you is, and I welcome any thoughts or processes that we can do to increase or further reassure around accountability. I'm not aware of any incidents where there has been a misuse of body worn video or deliberately not using it. If there are any, please tell me, because they will be dealt with very robustly. But if I bring Ryan in, he'll perhaps be able to give a bit more of a wholesome answer to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Thanks, Peter. So I look after and own the policy for body worn video. So I'd be really keen to hear some more about those incidents that have maybe prompted your concerns around it to help understand those a bit more. So if you're happy, we can meet separately just to hear about those. I'd be grateful for a chance to examine those a little further. Body worn videos, a little more generally talk about it. Actually, when we introduced it here in Northern Ireland, it was very welcomed by police officers and remains that way, probably in contrast to other jurisdictions where it was felt to be a tool to monitor police officer behaviour in the main, and there was some reluctance around it here, in the main because of the evidential opportunities it brought through for domestic abuse victimless prosecutions. It was welcomed, and there also had been a sense with police officers that there were spurious allegations and complaints made around issues such as stop and search, and body worn video gives them and gave them that sort of sense of, I guess, protection around that. And then thirdly, as we've spoken about before, the level of assaults on police in Northern Ireland is an outlier in the United Kingdom, and body worn video was felt by officers to act as a deterrent to people who they were being seen to behave in a certain way. So, you know, now we have about 3,500 operational body worn video kits, and we'll all have seen routinely police officers in the front line use those every day. The policy that we have really apes and mirrors that is the national policy, and the point I think that you're getting to in terms of the discretionary works, maybe just worth spending the discretionary on the part of the police officers to turn the camera on or not. It's worth spending a few minutes just chatting about that. I mean, of course, policing, the incidents the police officers go to are incredibly varied. So they'll range from emergency, 999, immediate responses where an incident's happening, to more slow time response when an incident is finished. A relatively small proportion of what we go to is actually crime. A lot of it's around safeguarding, finding missing people, dealing with people in health crisis, etc. So, and any time you video, you do engage the Article 8 right to privacy of the individuals that you're with and people in the periphery. So given all of that, the national guidance which we have in our policy is that it's at the discretion of officers when they'll turn it on or not. As the Chief's outlined, however, there are some scenarios where we say it's mandatory, particularly around stop and search. But like you, I want to be reassured that there's no sense that officers are turning cameras off or turning them on for reasons that are not appropriate. And as the Chief says, we want to deal with that in the strongest possible terms. To give you some reassurance, through the Service Accountability Panel, there is dip sampling of body worn video related to stop search specifically. We have got comprehensive dip sampling around domestic abuse incidents. Chief's mentioned we see in about 90% plus of emergency responses to those that body worn video is used and activated. My team supports our professional standards department and the police ombudsman in analysing body worn video cameras to understand when they've been on and when they've been off. And actually often when, on the rare occasions they are off, often it's a technical issue, and the Chief has already alluded to the fact that we're end of life in relation to the body worn video we have. But in summary, it's been an incredible asset for policing, both in terms of transparency, evidence and protection for police officers. But just rest assured that if there are issues where we feel that officers are not using it when they should be, and that's for a nefarious purpose, then we want to do something about that. And as I said, happy to talk to you in more detail around any specific worries you have, of course.
Thank you. And you mentioned about a written response. Do you still require a written response, or?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, thank you. Two more questions to go. Apologies, we're running a little bit over. Frank, you have a question? You take it into private session, okay? And Brendan, you have one on publication of custody pictures.
Yes, Chief Constable, a number of meetings ago, you gave an undertaking to review the custom and practice of PSNI not to publish the custody photographs of those convicted by the courts. You said that you would take time to review the policy and come back to the board. I was wondering if that review had now been completed and what the outcome was.
Yes, Brendan, thank you. I have reviewed it. In short, we will be publishing photographs of people convicted of certain serious crimes where there's a pleasing purpose to do that. The logistics of that is now being worked through by Ryan, but you will see convicted photographs for serious offences in line with the custom and practice elsewhere in Northern Ireland for the PSNI.
Thank you. That concludes today's questions. Could I thank our board members for their questions, and thank you, Chief, and your team for your open responses. Thank you to those who have joined us today online, and we will be back here, same place, same time, on Thursday, the 3rd of October, 2024. Thank you.